Marcus Hale watched it from the roof of the station, the long, flat-topped administrative building at the center of New Cairo Colony that served as communications hub, medical center, and emergency shelter, and which he had been responsible for maintaining since the colony was 3 years old. He was 26. He watched the transports lift off, one after another, against a sky the color of old copper, and he counted them, because counting things was what he did when he needed his hands to do something, while his mind worked through a problem. 47 transports, 11,238 people. The last one lifted at dusk. He watched its running lights until they disappeared into the clouds. Then he went back inside, made himself a cup of coffee from the last of the real beans. The synthetic stuff tasted like regret, and he decided some months ago that if it came to it, he would stop drinking coffee entirely rather than switch, and sat down at his desk and reviewed the situation. The situation was this. The Keth had been pushing the frontier back for 3 years. Vareth 4 had been in the contested zone for 8 months. For the last 2 of those months, the Colonial Defense Council had been arguing about whether to evacuate. The argument had finally been settled by a Keth strike on the neighboring system of Duval's Reach that turned a colony of 60,000 into a debris field, and the order had come down, and 11,000 people had spent 3 frantic days packing what they could carry and lining up for transports, and now they were gone. He was still here. This was not an accident. The station had needed a warden during the evacuation, someone to manage the communications arrays, coordinate the transport schedules, keep the power grid stable, ensure nobody got left behind. That was Marcus Hale's job, and he had done it, and when the last transport lifted and the job was technically finished, he had still been here, because there was still work to do. The colony's infrastructure was valuable. The atmospheric processors, the soil enrichment grids, the subsurface water network, none of it could be taken on a transport, and all of it represented 2 decades of human investment in a world that, if the war ever turned around, humans would want to come back to. Someone needed to stay and maintain it. Someone needed to make sure the Keth didn't just walk in and strip it to the foundations. He had sent a message to Colonial Command explaining this. Colonial Command had sent back a message explaining that his logic was sound, but his continued presence on Vareth 4 was unauthorized and strongly inadvisable, and that a transport would return for him in 72 hours. He had sent back a message thanking them for the information. The transport had come. He had not been on the landing pad. The transport had left. He had watched it go from the roof. Then he had gone back inside and started the work of getting ready to be here for a while. He was 41 years old. He had been born on a colony world, Harker's Landing, 3 jumps from Earth, and had spent his adult life working in colonial infrastructure, the unglamorous branch of the human expansion effort responsible for making sure the things that kept people alive kept working. He had a degree in systems engineering and a secondary certification in atmospheric management, and approximately 8,000 hours of experience with the particular kind of problem solving that happens when a piece of equipment is broken. The replacement part is 4 months away, and people will die if it stays broken. He was not a soldier. He had never held a weapon in combat. He was not especially large or especially strong or especially fast. He was, however, exceptionally stubborn, with a very precise understanding of what he could and could not maintain alone, and a willingness to do the math on situations that other people found too uncomfortable to calculate. He had done the math on this one. The Keth would come. He didn't know when. Their movements were unpredictable, but they would come to Vareth 4 eventually, because Vareth 4 had infrastructure they could use, resources they could strip, and a location in the frontier that had tactical value. When they came, they would find the colony abandoned. They would not be expecting opposition. That was the only advantage he had, and he intended to use it. He spent the first 3 months after the evacuation building what he came to think of as the argument. The argument was not a weapon, exactly, though it involved weapons specifically. The 12 colonial defense turrets that had been part of New Cairo's perimeter defense system, which he had not dismantled, and had instead spent considerable time learning to operate manually, modify, and relocate. It was more accurate to say that the argument was a philosophy of defense made physical, the idea that a single person, with complete knowledge of a terrain, sufficient preparation time, and an enemy that didn't know he existed could make himself genuinely, expensively difficult to remove. He read everything he could find on defensive tactics and asymmetric warfare. The station had a good library and he had time. He studied the Keth, their equipment, their standard operating procedures, their known weaknesses. He mapped every building in New Cairo, every tunnel in the subsurface network, every piece of terrain between the colony perimeter and the station. He built redundancies into his systems so that losing any single component would not collapse the whole. And he waited. The Keth did not come in the first year. He spent that year maintaining the colony infrastructure, the processors, the water network, the power grid, because that was the job. And because keeping the colony alive gave him resources and cover and a reason to stay. And because, if he was being honest, he needed the work to stay sane. He grew vegetables in the greenhouse. He repaired things. He read. He talked to himself more than he would have liked and argued back when he disagreed, which was often. He was, by any reasonable measure, completely alone on a world the size of a small continent. With no certainty that anyone would ever come back for him and a war going in the wrong direction, he did not allow himself to think about this too often. He focused on the work. Part 2, 10 years alone. Tenger's Own. The war. Went badly for 5 years and then slowly began to go less badly. Marcus tracked it through intercepted signals. The Keth used a tight beam, military frequency that he had figured out how to partially decrypt in year 2, which gave him about 40% of their communications in a garbled but decipherable form. And through the occasional official colonial transmission on the emergency beacon frequency, which was how humanity broadcast updates to stranded civilians. He had technically ceased to be a stranded civilian after year 1, when Colonial Command had officially listed him as missing and presumed dead. He had not corrected this. It seemed more trouble than it was worth of. The war turned in year 6, when humanity managed to hold the Keth advance at the Crestfall line, 3 systems that could be defended in depth, and started to push back. By year 8, Vareth 4 was behind the new front line. Not safe exactly, but no longer actively contested. No transport came. He was not surprised. The war was expensive, and there were tens of thousands of more pressing priorities, and one infrastructure administrator on an abandoned colony world was not high on anyone's list. He filed this under things he could not control and went back to work. He was, by year 1051 years old, in better physical condition than he had been at 41. The work saw to that, with a beard he trimmed every Sunday, because it was the one cosmetic habit he had maintained out of sheer principle, and a detailed, intimate knowledge of every square meter of New Cairo, and the surrounding terrain that he had built through a decade of obsessive mapping. He had also, in that decade, thought very carefully about what would happen when the Keth came, because they would still come. He was certain of it. The war's direction had changed, but Varethor was still valuable, and the Keth were methodical. They would sweep the frontier for resources. They would come here. He had used the 10 years well. Year 10 was also the year he made contact with another human for the first time since the evacuation. It was not a rescue. It was Specialist Yara Ose, a colonial intelligence analyst who had found his emergency beacon signal in a database, audit, and realized with considerable surprise that it was still active, and who had opened a comm channel more out of curiosity than protocol. "This is Vareth 4 Station, Warden Hale. Please identify." A pause. Then, "Warden Hale, I'm Specialist Osi, Colonial Intelligence. I'm looking at your beacon record, and it says you've been continuously active for 10 years. Are you actually still there?" "Still here," he said. "What's your status on Keth movement in this sector?" Another pause, longer. You've been alone on Vareth for 10 years. "Status on Keth movement specialist." He heard her pull up a display. "There's a Keth resource acquisition fleet on a sweep of the outer frontier. Projected to reach your sector in approximately. Warden, you need to evacuate. I can flag you for priority extraction. I'm not evacuating," he said. "What's their fleet composition?" "I am not going to." She stopped. He waited. He could feel her reassessing the situation through the silence. 3 heavy carriers, 14 escort vessels, and approximately 60 ground assault units per carrier. So roughly 1,800 ground troops. "Warden, I'll need their standard approach pattern for resource acquisition sweeps. You are one person. I know how many people I am. Specialist, I've been counting for 10 years. Approach pattern?" She gave it to him. She also, over the following weeks, gave him everything else Colonial Intelligence had on the Keth fleet. Their equipment loadouts, their communication frequencies, their chain of command, their standing orders for frontier sweeps. She was, he came to understand, a thorough professional who had decided that if she couldn't stop him, she was at least going to make sure he had the best possible information. He appreciated this more than he told her. "You understand," she said, on their last call before the fleet arrived, "that even with everything I've given you, the probability of—" "I know the probability," he said. "Then why?" He thought about how to answer this. He had, over 10, thought about it quite a lot. "Because this is my colony," he said. I've maintained it for 11 years. The atmospheric processors are running at 94% efficiency. The water network serves a dead city, but it serves it perfectly. The soil grids are ready to grow crops the moment someone wants to plant them. I've kept this place alive, and I'm not going to let the Keth walk in and strip it because it was inconvenient to send a transport. A pause. That, she said. That's it, he said. That's the most stubborn thing I've ever heard. Thank you, he said. Part 3. The fleet returns. The Keth fleet arrived on a Tuesday. He knew this because he still kept a calendar, because the alternative was losing track of time entirely, which he had decided years ago was a form of surrender he was unwilling to make. He was in the greenhouse when his sensors pinged 3 simultaneous alerts from the orbital detection array he had salvaged from one of the defense turrets and repurposed into an early warning system. He set down his trowel, wiped his hands, and walked to the communication center with the unhurried pace of a man who had been expecting this for a decade and had nothing left to do in preparation. He sat down, confirmed the sensor readings, and opened a channel to Specialist OC. They're here, he said. I know. Her voice was tight. I'm tracking them. Marcus, it was the first time she had used his name. He noted it. Marcus, it's not too late. I can have a fast courier at your location in 6 hours if you... They'll have the landing zones locked down in 4, he said. I appreciate it. Yara, a silence. Don't die, she said. I'll do my best, he said. He closed the channel. He took a moment, 30 seconds, no more, to sit quietly in the chair and be aware that he was 51 years old and alone on a world that was about to be invaded by 1,800 soldiers, and that the probability of this ending well for him by any traditional measure was approximately 0. Then he stood up, went to the equipment locker, and got to work. The Keth approach was exactly as OC had described it. 3 carriers in high orbit, dropping landing craft to secure the perimeter before the main force descended. Standard resource acquisition protocol. They were not expecting opposition. Their initial ground deployment was 40 soldiers, spread across 4 landing zones, tasked with a sweep and clear of what their scans had told them was an empty colony. Their scans had told them this because Marcus had, over the course of 3 months, carefully modified the colony's sensor reflection profile to conceal certain things. Not perfectly, he wasn't invisible, but enough to look like what they expected, an abandoned, deteriorating colony with no active power signatures, no life signs, and no threat. The first Keth scout team entered New Cairo at 0900. At 0914, they stopped reporting. He had not killed them. This was a deliberate choice, and one he had thought about for years. Dead scouts meant an immediate escalation to overwhelming force. Missing scouts meant confusion, investigation, delay. Delay was his friend. He had built the argument for delay. The scouts were in one of the subsurface maintenance tunnels, lured there by a heat signature he had created using a redirected atmospheric processor exhaust vent, and they were unhurt, but thoroughly stuck because the section of tunnel they were in had 3 sealed blast doors that could only be opened from the outside, and he had the only outside controls, and he had no immediate intention of using them. He watched them on the tunnel cameras, tiny figures in heavy armor, trying to contact their carrier, getting nothing because the tunnel walls were lined with the same signal dampening mesh he used to protect the colony's own communications during solar storms. He counted them. 12. He had expected 10. He adjusted his plan for 12 and waited for what came next. What came next was a second team, 40 soldiers this time, sent to find the first. He let them get a kilometer into the colony before he introduced them to his second argument. New Cairo had been built on a grid with wide main streets and narrower service lanes, and Marcus had spent 10 years learning exactly how sightlines worked in every lighting condition across every season, and had spent the last 3 months making certain modifications to certain buildings that changed those sightlines in specific ways. The second team entered a section of the colony that looked open and clear and was neither. He didn't fight them. He herded them, using the turrets, deployed not as weapons but as noise sources, firing into empty buildings, creating the impression of multiple defenders. He moved them gradually, methodically over the course of 4 hours into the industrial district on the colony's east side, where the processing plants and storage facilities formed a dense warren of corridors that an unfamiliar force could spend days in without finding their way out. He sealed the exits behind them. 54 soldiers now, between the tunnels and the industrial district. On the carrier, someone was having a very bad day. Part 4. The battalions. Response on day 2 was a full battalion. 600 soldiers deploying in coordinated sweep formation, with heavy equipment, including 2 armored ground vehicles and a tactical command post. Marcus observed this from the station roof with a cup of synthetic coffee. He had run out of the real beans in year 4, and felt something that he identified after a moment as satisfaction. 600 soldiers in heavy armor meant they had taken him seriously. Or rather, that they had taken the situation seriously. They still didn't know there was a him. They thought the colony had some kind of automated defense system. That was the most logical explanation for what had happened to their scouts, and Keth commanders were logical. He had prepared for this. The preparation had taken most of 10 years, but its core was simple. He knew this colony the way the Keth did not and could not. He knew which buildings had basements and which didn't. He knew which streets flooded in heavy rain and which drained fast. He knew which structures were solid and which had compromised foundations. He knew where the power conduits ran, and where they could be interrupted, and where interrupting them would cause cascading failures in ways that an enemy unfamiliar with the grid would not anticipate. He knew all of this because it was his job to know it. He had spent 11 years maintaining it and 10 years mapping it. The Keth Battalion spent the first day doing what they were trained to do: systematic sweep, building by building, quadrant by quadrant. They were professional and thorough, and Marcus let them work, staying out of their way, watching them on cameras, taking notes. They cleared the residential district, the commercial district, most of the administrative zone. They found none of his defenses. He had built them to be found only when activated, and he hadn't activated them yet. He waited until they were 3 hours into the agricultural processing zone, the most complex part of the colony, a maze of equipment bays and storage silos and connecting corridors, and then he turned the lights off. Not everywhere. Specifically, Keth had helmet lamps, he knew this for us. But helmet lamps created shadows, and shadows in an unfamiliar environment created hesitation, and hesitation was what he needed. He moved through the agricultural zone in darkness, using the maintenance access routes, narrow, low-ceilinged passages running behind the walls that the Keth scanners read as solid infrastructure rather than traversable space. He had been navigating them for years. He could do it by touch. Over the next 6 hours, working in the dark, he rerouted the battalion. Not all of them. He was realistic. About 200 he left alone, tracking them on cameras, making sure they stayed in sections of the colony where they couldn't do significant damage. The other 400 he moved systematically, using the same combination of noise, misdirection, and terrain manipulation he had used on the scouts, but scaled up, more complex, more carefully choreographed. He sealed them into the Eastern Agricultural Complex at midnight. 600 Keth soldiers, the original 54, plus the battalion. The carrier, he suspected, was now on its 3rd consecutive bad day. On day 3, the carrier sent a message. It came on standard communication frequencies, broadcast widely, which meant they were hoping he could hear it, which meant they knew, or suspected, that he was a person rather than an automated system. Unidentified defender of New Caro Colony. You have demonstrated significant tactical capability. We acknowledge this. We do not wish to cause unnecessary casualties. Communicate your terms. He sat with this for a while, then he opened a channel. This is Station Warden Marcus Hale, he said. New Caro Colony, Vareth 4. 11 years, 3 months in post. I am the only defender on this planet. A pause that he found satisfying. You are one person. Yes. You have detained 600 of our soldiers. They're comfortable. The industrial district has functional climate control, and I've been routing rations from the colony stores. They'll be fine. Another pause. What are your terms, Warden Hale? He had thought about this for a long time. He had the answer ready. You leave, he said. This colony, this planet, this sector. You mark it in your records as defended and not worth the cost. You tell your commanders that Vareth 4 has an active warden, and that taking it will be expensive. We have 14 more ships and 1,200 more soldiers. I know, he said. I've read your fleet composition. I've been planning for this scenario for approximately 8 years. I can keep going. You will eventually run out of resources, probably. But you will spend more taking this planet than it's worth. And you know it. That's why you sent a message instead of just sending more troops. A very long pause. You have been here alone for 10 years, the Keth commander said. The translator made it flat, but he thought there was something in it. Not admiration, exactly, but something adjacent. 11, he said. 3 months and 11 days. For what purpose? He thought of the atmospheric processors running at 94% efficiency, the water network serving a dead city perfectly, the soil grids ready and waiting. It's my colony, he said. I maintain it. The Keth commander went silent for 47 minutes. Marcus used the time to eat lunch and review his contingency plans for the next phase. In case the answer was no, the answer was not no. Part 5. What the Keth commander found. Sup, the Keth commander came down personally. This was not in any tactical manual Marcus had read, but it made a certain sense. If you were going to make a decision this unusual, you needed to understand what you were dealing with. And reports from confused troops were not adequate. Her name, in translation, was something like Deep Current Movestone, which the translator rendered as Commander Veth. She was taller than he had expected from the intelligence files. The Keth averaged around 2 meters, lean and long-limbed, with a structure that reminded him vaguely of herons, all careful balance and sudden speed. She wore no ceremonial armor. She walked into New Cairo with 2 guards and a translator and met him in the colony's main square, which he had chosen because it was open, and he could monitor it from 4 directions simultaneously. He was wearing his work clothes, gray coveralls with the colonial infrastructure patch on the left shoulder, worn at the elbows and knees, clean because he had washed them the night before out of some instinct about meeting people properly. She looked at him for a long time. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. "Everyone says that," he said, which was not true, but felt like the right thing to say. She walked the square slowly, looking at the buildings. He watched her look at them. He had spent years maintaining those buildings, patching facades, clearing debris, making sure the structural integrity held. "This colony has been abandoned for 11 years, she said. "Not abandoned," he said. "Evacuated. There's a difference. Abandoned means nobody's coming back." "Are they?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The war's been going their direction. Maybe. But that's not really," he paused. "That's not why I stayed." "Why did you stay?" He'd answered this question for Ose. He answered it the same way for Veth. "It's my colony. I maintain it." She was quiet for a long time. Her guards were watching him with the particular attention of soldiers who had been told there was one person on this planet and had subsequently seen 600 of their colleagues disappear and were still working out how to hold those 2 facts in their heads at once. "Show me," Commander Veth said. "Show you what? What you have maintained." He took her to the atmospheric processors first. They were on the colony's north edge, 4 squat towers that looked industrial and unimpressive, and were, in fact, extraordinarily complex machines that kept the air breathable across a 300-kilometer radius. He walked her through them, explaining what each component did, showing her the maintenance logs, 11 years of daily entries, every repair, every recalibration, every replacement part sourced from the colony's own dwindling stores. She read the logs. She read them carefully, page by page. He waited. Then the water network. Then the soil grids. She walked through the greenhouse last. He had been growing food there for 10 years. Vegetables, mostly, with some fruit trees he had propagated from seeds found in the colony stores. It was a practical space, not beautiful, but full of the specific living green that happens when something is well tended. Commander Veth stood in the greenhouse for a long time. "Why the plants?" she said finally. "I needed to eat," he said. "You could have used the stored rations. They ran out in year 3. And he looked at the plants. Growing things is different from maintaining machines. Machines either work or they don't. Plants are more." He searched for the word. "Resumsive. They tell you when something is wrong. I found it useful." "Useful," she said. "As a practice," he said, "of paying attention." She looked at him with an expression the translator couldn't render. Not the flat assessment she'd had since she arrived, but something more searching. "You've been paying attention to this world," she said, "for 11 years. Alone." "Yes. Most beings would have." She made a gesture that the translator rendered as deteriorated. "Lost coherence." "I had work," he said. "Work helps." She was quiet again, long enough that he started to think the conversation was over. Then she said, "We will mark Vareth 4 as a defended installation. The resource acquisition sweep will move to the next sector." He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "You're detained personnel," he said. "I'll release them now." "I would appreciate that," she said, with something in her tone that he thought might be, in a Keth way, dry. "Before you go," he said. She paused. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "Did you come down personally because you needed to understand how one person did this, or because you wanted to?" A pause. "Both," she said. "What did you find?" She looked around the greenhouse one more time at the careful rows, the thriving plants, the evidence of a decade of patient tending. "I found," she said slowly, "that I had been thinking about this planet as a resource, something to be taken." She looked at him. "You have been thinking about it as a responsibility, something to be kept." "Yes," he said, "that is a different relationship." "Quite different," he said. She left. Her fleet left 4 hours later. He watched the ships go from the roof. the same way he had watched the transport ships leave 11 years ago. He felt something that it took him a while to identify. He felt, for the first time in 11 years, something very close to vindicated. Loss. Epilogue. The warden's terms bar... The colonial transport arrived 14 months later. It was not a rescue ship exactly, more of an advanced survey vessel sent to assess the condition of frontier colonies for possible resettlement now that the war had finally officially ended. Marcus had known it was coming because Osi had told him, and had spent the 14 months finishing some work he wanted to have done before anyone arrived. The survey team was 5 people. Their lead assessor, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Farida Membeki, walked into New Cairo with a scanner and a skeptical expression and walked out of it 3 hours later looking considerably less skeptical and considerably more confused. The atmospheric processors are running at 96% efficiency, she said, reading from her scanner. That's better than they were when the colony was fully staffed. I had time, Marcus said. The water network is perfect. The soil grids are. She looked up. The soil grids are calibrated for high-yield agricultural production. This colony could support 12,000 people on first-season planting. 15,000 if they're willing to expand the north fields. I drew up the expansion plans. They're in the station database. She stared at him. You've been alone here for 12 years. Almost 13, he said. And you spent that time. She gestured broadly at the colony, the buildings, the processors in the distance, the carefully tended main square, doing all of this. It was the job, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said in a different tone, the Keth fleet that passed through this sector 14 months ago. They flagged Verith 4 as a defended installation. In Keth records, it's listed as, she consulted her scanner, actively maintained by a persistent guardian entity with demonstrated capability to defend the installation indefinitely. Their fleet command recommended against any future resource acquisition attempts. Good, he said. They thought you were some kind of automated system. I know. And then they came down personally. Yes. And found out it was one person. Yes. Dr. Mbeki looked at him for a long moment. What did they say? She asked. He thought about the greenhouse, the logs, the careful rows. Commander Veth standing among the plants with an expression the translator couldn't render. They said they had been thinking about this planet wrong, he said. She nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something he had not expected. So had we. He didn't ask her what she meant. He thought he understood. He made them coffee, real coffee, from the last of a supply Osi had sent him on the survey ship, because she was that kind of person. And they sat in the station's main room, where he had spent 12 years alone, and talked about resettlement plans, and expansion schedules, and what it would take to bring people back to Verith 4. He answered every question. He had, after all, had 12 years to think about the answers. Outside, the copper-colored sky of Verith 4 was the same as it had always been. The atmospheric processors hummed at 96%. The water network ran in its perfect, quiet way. The soil's grids waited. Marcus Hale, station warden, had maintained this colony through an evacuation, a war, 11 years of solitude, and an alien invasion, and he had delivered it to the future intact. The job he thought was done. He was ready for a new one.